John's greatest fear for Tony is that he will lose everything that has been built up for the past 15 years. He knows that because of Tony's lack of insight and experience dealing with people, he could lose the cabin. He could easily be left with nothing.
For 15 years he's been okay. Lonely maybe, but safe. She'll drive him backwards into a dark spiral, into a dark place, like when he was 17.
When John was 22 and Tony was 17, John returned home from working out west in the bush. He was not prepared for the situation that greeted him.
I'll never forget that day. I walk up the driveway to my house and I see Tony spinning a bike wheel, just spinning and staring. And him and little Eric, our 2-year-old nephew. Hey, Tony, it's me, John. Remember me? Hey, what's up, guy? Hey, you look weird.
Tony turned around and went into the house. John followed. He couldn't understand why Tony seemed so different. Tony went into his room, shut the door. Determined to speak with Tony, John opened the door and went in.
Jesus Christ, what happened to your room, Tony? You gotta clean up this mess. Old Len will kill you.
At that point, Tony turned up the radio. John asked him to turn it down. He turned it up even louder.
What's going on, Tony? What the hell happened to you? Okay, I'm going, but I'm coming back. It's a fucking pigsty, man, I'm telling you. Old Len will kill you.
There was no doubt in John's mind that Len would make things tough for Tony and for everybody in the house. John hated him, an abusive brute of a man. John knew he wouldn't get anything helpful from Len about Tony's situation. He would ask his mother and sisters. They could tell him what was going on.
Hey, what's up with Tony? Anybody? What's up here? Hello? I'm back. What's up with Tony?
They just walked away.
You gotta know something. It's not nothing, you know. This is not normal. Hey, if you don't know, who does? Now, what's happened here?
Tony didn't leave his room for months at a time. John got him out for a walk finally. He made it down the driveway but ran back terrified, back into the house.
But one day, we made it to the corner store. He stood in the middle of the aisle like a deer in the headlights. Weird bird-like pose, standing on one foot and with his arm behind his shoulders and balancing. And
Tony continued to sink into some dark space.
talking to himself, yelling, and
Len kept throwing Tony out of the house, and he got into trouble stealing, drinking all the time. The law caught up with him, which eventually led to that incident I mentioned earlier and to the psychiatric hospital.
And then thrown into the hands of that old judge. In prison. Oh, brother Tony, I can't imagine how you got through it. But you did.
When Tony got out of jail, he had no place to go.
Same old problem. Nowhere to go. Hey, when the world thinks you're different.
In his teens, Tony didn't seem too odd. He had been quite athletic, a good runner, and he improvised on the piano, often to audiences.
You were quite the star. Good at sports. Good looking, too. Yeah. Girls calling on you all the time. Not me. They always wanted to talk to you. What a scruffy pair we were back then, eh? Like a couple of orphans out there roaming the streets, looking for some place to go.
They would usually end up drinking into some bar. John could drink and wasn't looking for trouble.
But you, brother Tony, always caught up in dumb stuff. Do you remember that one night I took you to emergency? Your face all bashed in?
Tony was always going after big guys.
You called him an asshole. Always went after big, good-looking guys. Why, Tony? Why did you do that?
The other guy called Tony a goddamn hippie and hit him across the face.
Tony the hippie. Looked the part. Played the music. First hippie I ever met.
But Sadly, Tony was even too weird for the other hippies, not that there were many in town, so he was usually on his own.
You know what, Tony? You still look like a hippie. An aging hippie.
But that night, Tony looked like what he was, an aging victim. John was not amused. He stopped drinking with him after that night.
And I still don't. And I still can't bear thinking of him back in that world where he was always a victim.
Monica and her greed are a constant threat to Tony's safety now, and John fears if Monica has her way, Tony will lose the property and any security he has away from predators.
Tony, the world is as mean a place as it's ever been. Now you lose this.
It had taken years of futile attempts to solve the problem of where Tony could live safely. He simply could not cope with some situations. The cabin by the river that he and Tony shared for a while after Sudbury, that was an example. The lights and the noise from the highway triggered something in Tony's brain.
He panicked, broke everything in the place. But then why wouldn't he? He felt under attack. The rooms we found for you, oh, do you remember how depressing that was?
Tony was getting welfare. You needed a room, at least a room, in order to claim it. So John kept getting him rooms that he got kicked out of. The landlords would collect the checks and take the rent, and then often would kick people out if they were any trouble at all.
Screaming all night? Well, lots of guys do that. He didn't hurt anybody. You took his money. Yeah, he's paid up till the end of the month. You can't just kick him out.
They went through rooming house after rooming house. John was getting frustrated and feared for Tony's safety.
One night he jumped right out the second-story window, broke both ankles. Thought somebody was coming after him, right through the wall.
To make things worse, the people at welfare cut Tony off. John went to the office with Tony.
Well, don't you get it? He needs welfare. You can't just cut him off. He can't get work. He doesn't get work.
The welfare worker tells them Tony is too needy.
Too needy? He's diagnosed schizophrenic, so of course he's needy. Look at his circumstances. You have no right to say he's too needy. That anyone's too needy. And what the hell does that mean, too needy? And it's not your goddamn money. Shit.
Tony needed at least the basics to survive, just like the rest of us. John and Tony kept going back to welfare, but got nowhere. Tony was being driven further and further away from any help he could expect from the system.
Over the years, Tony was driven away from the house into the garage. From the garage into the park, and then from the park into the bush. Further and further into the bush. No money to live on.
Tony had nothing but sleeping bags for warmth, food from the dumpsters, and could only feel safe far away from other people. All the time, the predators were on the prowl.
Sometimes, when I woke up in the morning, I wondered if he got through the night. Some nights were so bloody cold.
It was 30 degrees below the night John took 2 policemen with him to go and find Tony in the bush.
Oh, man, they were some pissed off. Middle of the night, and they get dragged into the bush with this maniac looking for his brother.
The 3 of them wandered about. John had some idea of where he might be, and they were about to give up when John tripped over something.
Oh, I'll never forget that feeling. Seeing Tony lying there on an old piece of cardboard, wound up in layers of sleeping bags and blankets. His head covered. I could barely see his face. But I knew he was alive.
There was no response from Tony. It was like they weren't there. John checked his breathing, then figured he might be afraid because of the police.
It's okay. I asked them to come. Help me find you. They're okay. They're no trouble. These cops are trying to help. I offered him some coffee. Oh, that was a bad idea.
Tony had told John before that hot drinks make him sweat and that the sweat makes him freeze.
Do you hear me? Say something, Tony. You want to come into the car? Get warm anyway? Nothing? Nothing? You don't want nothing? Right then, I'll be back tomorrow.
John was afraid Tony would die out there. He looked like a skeleton.
Ah, one of those mummies you see in the museums, only still alive.
John knew that night that he couldn't stand by and watch another member of his family die of neglect the way his mother had. He knew Tony knew more about surviving than anyone, but feared that this time he was near dying. He felt sick.
Oh, like I'd swallowed a stone.
And he realized that the nature of the relationship had to change. He could no longer be Tony's buddy. That wasn't enough.
He needed someone to look after him, look out for him, somebody to fight for him. He was a disabled person and he needed care, an advocate.
But John was recently married and had a young family. He was trying to keep down a job.
I felt so goddamn alone. Nobody else seemed to care. Family refuses to talk to me about Tony, and as if he had caused his own problems.
As sometimes happens in this life, we meet someone who cares enough to give us the right information at the right time. This happened to John and Tony outside the welfare office one day. An elderly woman overheard the welfare people telling Tony there was nothing for him anymore. She told them that what Tony needed was ODSP and that she had managed to get this for her son.
I had never heard of that. Didn't know what she was talking about. She told me to get a letter from his doctor saying he was schizophrenic and that should do it. She told us where to go and how to get to the disability office. Never saw her again. I wonder if she knew what that conversation meant to us.
Now, getting the doctor's note was not easy. Tony hated doctors and hated the idea that he would have to say that he was schizophrenic. He never believed there was anything different about him.
You only have to be schizophrenic for about an hour. Just long enough for us to get you that note. Think of it, Tony. A regular monthly income. It's there to help keep you alive.
John explained that the word didn't have to mean anything to them, but that's what a psychiatrist had to believe, that Tony was disabled because of his schizophrenia.
We were in there for about 5 minutes, and the doctor signed a note saying Tony should get ODSP. Said he should have had it years ago. We were both stunned.
Tony had been through the psychiatric system, the prison system, the welfare. All those people making good salaries for all those years, good government jobs.
20 long years since his diagnosis at the psychiatric hospital. What happened to that information? Those people being paid, and Tony had nothing and nobody even mentioned disability. Think of the pain that could have saved him. And me.
ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program, is for people who are needy, people like Tony. Nobody in the disability office said Tony was too needy. Not like the people in welfare. It's like Tony didn't matter until that psychiatrist told them he should have been getting it for years.
He could have had a chance. Well, anyway, he got it. Still has it. Changed his life. Got in this place.
John becomes quite thoughtful, thinking back to those first days after Tony got a regular income and how now, 15 years later, Tony is stronger and managing better socially. Time for some new beginnings to move him along. And that's why John has come to the cabin today. He's got some ideas to help do this, ideas that will lighten his own burden.
Get what you deserve. You've got a living income, your own place in this log cabin, built just for you. Now you need some other services. Make your life more interesting. You're more social now. You can learn stuff, new stuff. Add to your skills.
Over the years, Tony had acquired some new skills. He learned to manage a chainsaw, cut logs out of the bush, do small fixes as long as there was masking tape around. What John was thinking now was that he could learn some new social skills, attend group meetings, get to meet some people, would get regular care from a doctor, maybe a psychiatrist, a social worker. When Tony first moved onto the property, he lived like a hermit. Just a trailer that he trashed. John encouraged him to think about doing things to improve the property. Tony had trouble grasping that the place was his to own and to look after.
Tony couldn't get his head around owning his own property. Well, hell, why should he? He'd never owned anything, never had anything to improve.
When Len, the stepfather, died, Tony and John received $2,000 each. Their sister was the primary heir, and she decided they should each have something.
The old bastard finally died. Bowel cancer. Couldn't happen to a nastier person.
John knows that society rewards people for how they appear, not how they are. And just because someone can communicate, earn a living, achieve ordinary respect, that doesn't get them the right to be nasty to anyone, much less a disabled person. When John told Tony about the money, he was stunned. This was the first time Tony owned any money.
I have to help you spend it. Condition of the inheritance.
All Tony ever owned was what he carried on him. None of it new. Never had anything, and now he had cash of his own. John asked him what he wanted to buy with the money. Tony told him he had his eye on a used bike at the store.
Hey, Tony, you can buy a new bike, and you can get your teeth fixed. You say they hurt like hell.
That all happened over 15 years ago. Now, as John sits in the cabin waiting for Tony to return from town, he recalls the transition for Tony from vagrant, living in the bush, to a...
Goddamn land baron. That's what he calls himself now.
And so he might. He believes he now owns 44 acres of land and a substantial log cabin made from the logs from his own land.
We got a vendor take-back mortgage from the owner of the property, which was manageable monthly. Tony moved into a used trailer that we brought up for him. He trashed this very quickly, though.
John believed they could build something more substantial. He got a $5,000 loan and then hired a local builder, Gus. Gus cut down enough cedar logs to make the cabin from the property. Several months later, it was in place, and over the years was improved with additional services. John and Tony helped out. John whenever he could, using his limited skills, but Tony spent most of the time observing from the bush. Tony to this day believes he built the cabin himself with a bit of help. This is part of the reason he thinks Monica's idea of selling him some land is a good one.
Where the hell are you? With Monica? Yeah, plotting to sell this place. It took years to make this happen. Now you're planning to throw it all away? This is the one place you can be safe. Like I told you before, we bought this place. When you own your own property, you can be safe from people who beat you up and steal things and hurt you. Nobody can beat you up on your own property. They can't be on your property if you don't want them to be. If they come, you call the cops. You can tell the cops to throw them off. They'll be working for you. And now you own your own property, you've learned lots of stuff and had animals. You want to throw it all away for some woman who'll eat you alive?
John has managed to help Tony move ahead in his life and has had to do this on his own. There's been no ongoing family support, but years of resistance. It seemed too much for them. He recalls when he told them of his idea to get Tony a piece of land now that he had a secure income.
Yeah, a property. place of his own to live on, to be safe on. And I'll take care of it.
He asked them for help, asked them to go out looking with him, to support the idea. Suggested they get him a trailer. He had sleeping gear, didn't need much else.
Help me out here. We got to get him someplace safe. He's dying out there in the bush. Like this can work. It's realistic. I'm going out looking tomorrow. Phone me.
But the phone calls didn't come, and John went out looking for land on his own.
We had nothing for a down payment, just wanted land with a road in, somewhere near a store where the building codes were loose.
He spent months looking. He found this piece in a local paper, 44 acres, lots of bush, a beaver pond.
And the sweetest air you'll ever smell.
He drove Tony up to look at it. They had checked out a lot of properties before this. They went to look at this piece of land, and when Tony saw it, he called it a paradise. A big word coming from Tony.
You remember that, Tony? Your paradise. Your own paradise. I still get a rush when I hear that word. It's yours. To keep. For life. And you want to sell it and start all over? Well, count me out.
John thinks back to the work that went into building this place. Tony has learned a few things, but to think he could build on his own? Well, that's when the word delusional makes sense. The reality seemed beyond Tony's understanding. John has often said that if Tony shows any indication of being able to build, they could maybe talk.
Even a shed. Just build a shed to get some practice. See how that goes. Then we can talk about you building again. Well, anything. Just try anything.
And Tony's response is that he doesn't need to build a shed. He can build a cabin. End of conversation.
I don't know what he doesn't get about learning. What's involved when you learn stuff.
Gus felled and prepared the logs, built the cabin. In Tony's mind, Tony became the boss. My land, I am the boss.
Oh, there were days when I thought Gus would just walk off the job. He was grumpy. Young, but grumpy. Oh, no patience for Tony, the boss. Pissed off with his arrogance. But you know, that didn't give Gus the right to treat Tony so bad.
Gus spoke to Tony as if he was stupid.
He's not stupid. And he's not slow. Definitely not retarded. Just no experience, Gus.
Except as a survivor. Tony had kept alive in the bush for 20 years, and John said that they had to respect that. It was never something that they could do. What Tony needed now was to learn stuff. But Gus was not about to become his tutor.
We're all teachers, Gus, and learners. I know, you're a builder, but please don't speak to him like he's stupid.
Which is often what happens when people speak to someone who is different. They forget or don't know that person just processes stuff differently from the rest of us.
But out of whack, that's all. That's all. It doesn't make him stupid. And he hears voices. You gotta remember that. It's crazy making.
John reminded Gus that Tony knew more about surviving than anybody else. That's been his life's work, just staying alive.
Oh, bloody hard job.
Like begging on the streets. A full-time job just to stay alive. Anyway, Gus must have heard what John was saying, because one day he saw Gus teaching Tony how to drive the horse. They didn't see John, but Tony was grinning ear to ear.
My heart felt full that day.
Although it was often tough going, John and Tony did have some fun back then. Like the day they tobogganed down the driveway in insulation for the cabin. John screaming and Tony smiling his crooked sideways smile.
Like a couple of kids. Like brothers. Having fun in the snow. Like when we were kids. Me and my kid brother. Having fun together.
John thinks about the other times he and Tony had fun together, chasing chickens, walking the woods, planting apple seeds, and the unbelievable luxury of picking a dog at the pound.
But now, when he starts talking about building again, I just about lose it. I'm thousands in debt, and you don't even notice. You never pay for materials, never pay a penny on stuff that needs to get done.
Tony calls with a problem, and John fixes it, like the new roof last year. But Tony has made some small changes in the cabin.
Like that cedar siding he put up in this inside wall. Sure, it's a bit off here and there, but it's brightened the place up a bit, and he's pleased with himself. Nice work, Tony. He's good with a chainsaw now. Better than me.
At first, John was terrified thinking of Tony using a chainsaw on his own. He wasn't ready for that. And Tony had broken the first saw that John brought up by not mixing oil and gas.
No, it can't be fixed. And I can't afford a new one. I told you, gas and oil. I told you we should share it, and I'd take it home and look after it. But it's useless now. I can't get another one.
So Tony was left without a chainsaw, which was fine by John. He was terrified of accidents. One day he came out to the cabin and found that there was a window cut in the cabin wall, right through the log wall. Tony showed him a new saw.
You cut this window with this saw? Where'd you get this saw?
Tony showed John a credit card.
With your Canadian Tire credit card? You got a Canadian Tire credit card? Oh, shit, man.
John could smell a new wave of trouble, a new kind of predator had entered Tony's life, and he didn't have a clue what that would mean.
Hell, Tony, I didn't give you the saw. You know you have to pay it back with interest. Didn't anybody tell you about interest? Interest. That's what it costs you to borrow. They'll be sending you a bill every month, and you're going to have to pay and pay and pay.
John told Tony he would not contribute anything to this debt or any others. Tony had joined the Consumer Society and got cards for everything. John couldn't figure out how that happened. Tony had more cards than he did.
He used to sneer at me, call me a consumer. Well, now the corporate predators have got you, Tony, and I'm staying out of this. Those bastards will have to deal with you on their own.
John was heavy-hearted about this new attack on Tony, but Tony was full of desire for the shiny stuff he could now purchase. And Monica smelled more potential for cash from Tony. John realizes that that may be why he wants to sell the property to pay off his debts and get cash for Monica.
And he'll become that skeleton living in the bush again. He's too old and soft to survive that again.
John realizes he can't fix Tony's life, can't solve it all. Tony's not listening to him, and John feels like he is running out of voice.
I still got some wisdom and lots of thoughts, but my voice is wearing down. My body's wearing down too. I'm losing heart, and my heart feels hurt. You treat me like I was evil. Enough!